Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Judy Blake. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are in Houston, Texas, and I am with Family to Family Network. I am joined by my colleague, Leslie Lawson. And Leslie is waving there. Leslie and I are very, very honored and proud to be presenting in front of all of you today. We understand completely that the special education process is very, very overwhelming. We understand it. Leslie and I have been through it. So what we're going to try to do today is to either demystify some of the myths. We are going to explain to you what the law is and what the processes are. We believe it's really important to work collaboratively with your schools. Work with your teachers. Teaching is a very hard job. The schools are under tremendous stress. So we want families to work with the schools, but sometimes it's really challenging and people don't quite understand the law. So what we're doing is we're explaining what your rights are, what the law is, so that everyone is playing by the same rules and following the same guidelines. So if you could hold your questions until the end, that would be great. And you can also write them in the chat box. If you're kind of nervous, don't worry. We can always ask your question for you. So Leslie, if you could go ahead and share your screen, please. And for those of you who I'm not quite sure what your name is and how you registered, please look in the chat box because I may be sending you a private message as I check you off for attending this class. But we are very, very glad that you joined us. So, special education, what you need to know. Next slide, please.
I'm trying to get it on the...
Oh, the slideshow? Yeah, just go to presenter view.
Yeah, it's blocking it again. Hold on just a second.
Darn. No problem.
There we go.
Yes, you will be getting a copy of the slides after the meeting. But you must complete the survey. There you go, Leslie, you're almost there. Go up a little bit. Nope.
Sorry.
That's okay, don't you worry.
Might not be able to do the animation, Judy. It's okay.
Well, that's not it. It's just, it's showing that, yeah. If you,
hang on.
By the way, we did this beforehand and everything worked just great. So yeah, X out of it, don't save it. Okay, and then share again. And for those of you sending me your name in the chat box, thank you so much for doing that. Bear with us for a few moments while we have some technical difficulties. Okay, go ahead and share your screen again.
Okay, just I'm almost there.
Okay, no problem. And Wednesday, we should be starting more on time. It's always harder with the first class. Leslie, it should be at the bottom. Okay, I need to mute. There we go. Okay, so right there you go, slideshow. And from the Groovy, thank you, Leslie. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Don't you worry. Next slide, please. So special education, what you need to know. Welcome. We're going to go through this very quickly since we're a little bit behind. This is a very safe space. You can just show the whole slide, Leslie. Please feel free to ask any questions that you want. We want everyone to feel comfortable. No question is silly. No question is ridiculous. It's really important that you get your questions answered. You can always private message our interpreters, Myrna or Catherine Torres, and we can ask your question privately. Please make sure that you're on mute. We hope to finish in an hour. Next slide, please. So we just want to know a little bit about you all. We realize that there are people in this class who have children from newborns all the way through high school. Can you just type in the chat box, is your child 0 to 5, elementary school, middle school, or high school? If you could type that in the chat box. If you're on an iPhone or can't type, not able to, don't worry. I see 0 to 5, elementary. Okay, it just kind of gives us an idea. Okay, I see elementary, 0 to 5.
Trying to
Middle.
figure out if there's anybody in middle or high school.
Yeah, we do have so far a couple in middle school who are direct messaging me, Leslie.
Okay, that's good. I'll cover
okay.
everything then.
Perfect. So get us started, some abbreviations that you need to know. And keep in mind, we don't expect you. Okay, you can stop typing in the chat. We have an idea. Thank you so much. So there's a ton of abbreviations, and we know that's really, really challenging for everybody. So we want to clarify some of those abbreviations. ECI stands for Early Childhood Intervention. So that's basically 0 to 3 years old. That is ECI. ECSE. This is called Early Childhood Special Education. Now, back when Leslie and my sons went to school, it was called PPCD, Preschool Program for Children with Disabilities. Well, now they've changed it, and it's now called ECSE, Early Childhood Special Education. What we're doing today is all based on what we call IDEA. Leslie and I did not just come up with these rules, these laws. We are basing it on the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Please keep in mind, this is federal law, and it is to protect the rights of students with disabilities. That's what it is. An ARD meeting. Please make sure that you're muted if you could when you log on. An ARD meeting. Admission, review, dismissal. So a lot of these terms you're going to be hearing again and again. IEP, that is the Individualized Education Plan. So that is specific only for your child. It's not as though Leslie's child would have the same IEP as my child would. An FBA is a functional behavioral assessment. A BIP, behavior intervention plan. So before you go to the next slide, Leslie, so we just want you to be familiar with what these abbreviations are, because these are abbreviations that every parent who has a child with a disability should know. Now, granted, if you're in middle school or elementary school, you're not going to know ECI, possibly because maybe you just moved here or your child was diagnosed at 6 years old with a disability. So you would have not been a part of the ECI program, or your child would not have been in the Early Childhood Special Education program. But the remaining 5 abbreviations, everyone should be aware of. Most importantly, IDEA, ARD, and IEP. Very, very important. So what is the purpose of IDEA? It is to make sure that children with disabilities are receiving a free, appropriate public education. And it's important that it emphasizes those related services and special education that's to meet their unique needs. And the purpose of IDEA is to prepare your children, your loved ones, our students, for further education, employment, and independent living. So keep in mind that every ARD meeting that you have, those yearly meetings, that is preparing your child for when they graduate high school. So in those ARD meetings, you're discussing when they graduate, is it going to be further education? Maybe not. Maybe it's just employment. Maybe it's employment and independent living. But I think it's really important that you realize what the purpose of all of those ARD meetings are and IDEA is, so that there is a plan. I can't tell you how many parents I talked to, their children have graduated high school last spring, and they're either 19 years old or 21 years old or even 22 years old. And what was the plan? Well, there was nothing decided. Well, that's the purpose of IDEA. So everything that you're doing every year for your child is to make sure that there is that plan. So I just want to go over this briefly. What happens when your child turns 3 years old? They are no longer in the ECI program and they transfer to the public school. So the ECI service coordinator, they need to conduct a planning meeting for transition. And this happens about 90 days before your child turns 3 years old. So in between 3 months before, or 9 months before. And the purpose of this meeting is for you, the parents, to meet the school district people. Again, this only applies to people on this call who have children 0 to 3 years old.
That are in ECI.
That are in ECI for this particular slide. Yes, thank you for clarifying that, Leslie. So the parent, your child's therapist if you want to, the ECI service coordinator, and a public school representative should attend this transition meeting. And you can invite other people if you'd like, even though this isn't typically the case, but this is your chance to meet the school district people. Your ECI service coordinator should develop a plan with steps to help your child transfer out of ECI. They're going to help you figure out if your child is eligible for special education services. They're going to help you learn about these services. They're going to help you explore other options in the community and help you determine what else should be considered. We don't want you to feel alone in this process, and that is what your ECI service coordinator is for. My son is now 27, and when he was in the ECI program and then graduated, it was so helpful to have somebody that I'd known for 2 years coming into my home every day, go with me to the school and sit in that first ARD meeting. That was really, really helpful. If your child might be eligible for special education services, they must refer your child to your local school district with your consent. And then we have listed a really great link from Navigate Life Texas. And Navigate Life Texas, you're going to see us referring to that quite a bit. It's a wonderful website for children with families with disabilities. And for those of you who speak Spanish on this call, for those people where English is your second language, maybe you speak English, Asian, Farsi, Chinese, Mandarin, whatever. Navigate Life Texas is a great website. It has it in so many different languages. So there was a parent who just sent me a message that their son's therapist never joined them and they were so confused and a little overwhelmed. I completely understand. And I'm glad that you're joining us today so that we can bring some sense to all of this for you. And then afterwards, if you want to follow up with us, please feel free, because we never want somebody to be confused, and we know it is very overwhelming. So I'm sorry to hear that that happened, Monica. Leslie, is this where you start, or I still continue with this one?
I think I start here.
Okay, so now we're going to have Leslie take over, and I'm going to go ahead and check everybody in. So if for some reason I don't see what your name is, I might be sending you a private message, but I will look in the chat box first. Thank you so much.
So I want to talk about anybody who has a child that's not in ECI. The timelines are a little different, so I just want to make sure everybody knows the timelines. And we're talking about the initial evaluation. When the school receives a notice, okay, this is still ECI, sorry. They have to evaluate the child within 45 days of receiving the notice. They're going to conduct a full and individual evaluation in every area of suspected disability. And then the school's going to have an ARD meeting or an IEP meeting, whichever you like to call it, within 30 days. And some of these timelines are going to be similar if your child is not transitioning in from ECI. But one important thing to note that's different, if your child's in ECI, when they transition in, 3 means 3. So they have to have everything done. And by your child's 3rd birthday, when they turn 3, they're eligible to start. So that has to be done. If your child's not in ECI and you've referred them for special education, they have to get the whole evaluation done before your child can start school. So that's what we're going to talk about now, is the timelines if you're not in ECI. So if you didn't receive any services in your home or in the ECI clinic, in order to request an evaluation, you have to put it in writing. And I can't stress putting things in writing enough on anything that's important. And you can use email, that's fine too. But if you put it in writing, you're going to have a paper trail and you're going to ask them to respond in writing. And that way everybody's on the same page. Once the school receives your written request, they have 15 days to send you a form that you're going to sign where you consent for the full and individual evaluation. And they have to evaluate in every area of suspected disability. So that form is going to have some information, and you can always write on there if you're worried about it, and make sure beforehand that they are evaluating in every area that you're worried about. If they refuse to do an evaluation, maybe they just want to do a screener instead of a full evaluation, they have to provide you that information. And then they also have to provide your procedural safeguards, which tells you what your rights are under the law if that happens. It tells you what to do if you disagree with their decision. So when they give you your procedural safeguards, I highly recommend that you read them. You may not need them at that time, but keep them and read what your rights are in case you ever disagree with the IEP committee. They have 45 days to do the evaluation after you sign consent. And then they have 30 days to have a meeting to review the results, determine eligibility, and develop the IEP if your child is eligible. And remember, all during that process, you have procedural safeguard rights. So that's really important to know. They can't do anything or not do something unless you allow it. And like Judy said, I'm going to really tell you what your rights are, but I do want to stress that you want to work with the school and do it, in a kind way. But you also, you're your child's best advocate. So you definitely, want to stand your ground if you need to. Okay, it's not wanting to go to the next slide. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Did it go to the next slide yet?
No, I'm hitting enter. Is there another way to, let me try down at the bottom real quick.
Okay.
Oh,
There you go.
there we go.
Yay.
So a few things that I really want you to remember is to always keep any written documents for your record, maybe do a notebook, have all that information handy. Also mention that anybody can make a referral for an evaluation. It could be the teacher, it could be the parent, or anybody that's concerned about the child. So when they do an evaluation, whether it's the initial evaluation or or a follow-up, a 3-year reeval, or if you ask for an evaluation, you can only ask for one, not more than once a year. The first thing they do is something called a read. It's a review of existing evaluation data. And they would even do that with the initial evaluation because they're going to gather information from you. And also if your child has had any outside therapy or information from any doctors. I just want you to know that the reevaluation of existing data is the first part of an evaluation, but it is not an evaluation. And a lot of times that comes up when it's time to do a 3-year reeval. They'll do a read. And then they'll say, oh, I don't think we really need to do any new evaluations, new formal evaluations. And of course you have a right. Oh, there we go. You have a right to insist on the evaluation, not more than once a year though. Not that you want to do it every year though, only if the child had made a lot of progress or wasn't making progress. But generally you don't need one more than every 3 years. But I just want to stress that a read is not a new evaluation. It's just kind of a compilation of everything that's happened in any new, any old data or information on the child. You also, during the evaluation process, you also have a right to know what assessments and tests they're going to use and how they're going to be used to develop the IEP. I don't know why my computer's doing this.
Leslie?
Yep.
Someone had mentioned in the chat box when you mentioned about the 30 days, is it calendar days or school days? And I believe you meant 30 school days, correct?
Correct.
Great, thank you.
And then also we're gonna give you the link to get a handbook. I can't remember if we send out binders or not, for a IDEA handbook. And all of this information, don't feel like you have to take a lot of notes because all this information, we're going to provide you with the slides and you're going to get your procedural safeguards. And we're going to recommend that you get the IDEA handbook, which is really, really parent friendly. I used mine all during my son's school years. I highlighted things, tabbed pages, and brought it with me to every meeting because a lot of times they might say something that's not correct. A lot of times some of the people in the IEP committee may not know everything. Not that they're trying to pull anything over on you, but sometimes I've had to correct them and I use that IDEA handbook to do that. So the school has to send you written notice if they recommend anything or decline anything, or if they refuse to do an evaluation, or if they suggest a screening instead of a full evaluation. So keep that in mind. And before the school can do any new evaluation, and this is even, you know, after your child is does have an IEP in the future, they cannot do any evaluations without your consent. So you shouldn't have to worry about that. And all through this process, you do have due process rights every step. And that's your procedural safeguard, your right to file a complaint, ask for mediation, or file due process.
She lives not far from her house, right?
Some of the areas that your child might need to be evaluated for, maybe autism, maybe you suspect your child has autism or they have a speech delay, fine motor, gross motor, adaptive behavior, intellectual disability, reading, social skills. So just keep in mind, it's really important when they're doing the initial evaluation to find out what evaluations they are going to do, because sometimes they leave things out that you're concerned about, and you want to make sure it's in the initial evaluation, because there are very strict timelines for the initial evaluation, and for evaluations after the initial evaluations, there's really no set timelines in the law. So that would be something that you would agree upon in an IEP meeting. So make sure your child is evaluated in every area of suspected disability, every area that you're concerned about. So you have a lot of rights during the evaluation process. And we're gonna recommend the IDEA handbook. We're gonna mention that a lot. I have down page 33, but I forgot, Judy and I forgot that we have an updated IDEA manual online. So the pages might not be exact, but they do have a great table of contents in there. So there's a whole section on all of your rights during the evaluation process, but some of them are, you know, they have to tell you in writing before they evaluate your child, or if they refuse to evaluate, you have the right to be given all the information about ability, skills, and any areas they're going to be evaluated in. If you want descriptions or explanations of the test or the assessments or procedures, they have to give that to you. And also, you should have the reports, of course, before you have any IEP meetings. That's really important, because you don't want to go into your IEP meeting and not have all that information, and they're going over it and you've never seen it before. And also, if you had any questions about the evaluation reports before the meeting, you could get them answered by someone at the school, like the diagnostician or somebody in the special education department. And they should consider all of the evaluations at the meeting, including any outside evaluations that you bring from professionals that don't work for the school, in case your child is getting any outside help or therapy. And of course, any information should be in your language that you can understand. And you want to make sure all the information that they go over is accurate about your child. And you should let them know if there's something that isn't accurate. The evaluations and tests, make sure they're appropriate for your child, especially if they're going to do like an IQ test. You know, you don't want them doing a verbal IQ test on a child that's nonverbal. That happened to my son. So it really wasn't a good measure. And make sure they're not just using one single assessment or test to determine eligibility. It should be a variety. I really like this page. This is the Texas Autism Target Manual. And even if your child's not on the autism spectrum, this is a great website to go to, because if you click on evaluations, you can go by different categories or different areas and read about all the different evaluations. So you could look at this and say, oh, I didn't know that there was an evaluation for social skills or executive functioning or something that maybe they're not haven't mentioned to evaluate. So not that they do every area, it depends on your child, but it's a great place to learn about evaluations and different interventions, so you can be on the same page, because you are an equal member of the ARD committee. And I think you're the most important member because you know your child the best. So you want to have as much information as they have when you go in there. So once your child has been evaluated, if you think the evaluation is wrong or not complete, there are things you can do. You can ask the school to do more testing. You can also ask for the school to pay for an independent education evaluation. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. Maybe you just don't agree with, for instance, the speech evaluation. So if you ask for an IEE, an independent evaluation, the school pretty much has to do that. The only way they cannot do that is if they take you to due process, and they really don't want to do that because that's timely, cost money and everything. So it's a good way for parents to get a second opinion if you don't agree with what the school is. If the picture's not a good picture, the reports aren't a good picture of your child, or if the services that they're offering, maybe you don't feel like they're appropriate or enough, you can always ask for an IEE. You do have to put your request in writing, and all of that information is in that IDEA handbook. I really love the handbook because they have sample letters where you can kind of take their letter and change it up to be specific to your child or whatever you're requesting. So I really like that handbook for that. The independent evaluations have to be done by a person that's qualified and who are not employed by the school. You can ask the school, excuse me, let me get a drink. You can ask the school where you can get an IEE, or you can get it done by someone that's not recommended by the school, as long as they have the appropriate qualifications and they agree to do a contract with the school. And mentioned this earlier, that they have to do it or they have to take you to due process. So once the evaluation is done, you're going to have the ARD meeting or the IEP meeting. I really recommend that you bring somebody with you. If it's your spouse, that's great. If it's a good friend there, just to take notes. Because I know it can feel very intimidating when you go in there and there's just you and all these other people around the table. It's nice to have somebody, by your side to help you out. And sometimes we get emotional in ARD meetings, so because they're talking about our children. So it's just good to have somebody there with you. And then again, I've already talked about you're the most important member of the committee because you know your child best. The meeting must be scheduled at a time and date that works for you and the school. So a lot of times parents will say, oh, they scheduled a meeting and they said, this is when the meeting is going to be. And if that time and date is great for you, that's great. But if it's not, they do have to schedule the meeting at a time and a date that works for you also. They have to provide an interpreter if you need one, but you have to let them know way ahead of the meeting so they can arrange for that. This is really important too. Make sure you always request copies of any evaluation reports, a draft of your child's present levels, a draft of their proposed IEP goals and objectives before the meeting, so you can have that information and be an equal member of the IEP team. You probably want to request this at least 5 days in writing. And of course, email is good before the meeting so you can get all that information. And personally, it's up to you, but if it was me, if I didn't have all that information to prepare for the meeting, I would ask to reschedule my meeting because you don't want to go in there unprepared. And then we talked a little bit about bringing someone else with you that knows your child. And make sure all required members of the committee are there. So, and that's also in the IDEA manual. Like if your child's going to be included in regular ed, they need to have a regular education teacher there. If your child's going to receive speech therapy, it's really important for the speech therapist to be there. So you should know all of that ahead of time. This is your procedural safeguards. You're going to get a copy. They have to give you a copy of this at least once a year, and it's all your rights. I like the procedural safeguards. Some things in the procedural safeguards are really easier to understand, and then some things in the IDEA handbook are easier to understand. But make sure you read over your procedural safeguards. They give you these for a reason. And if you've never looked at them, you really should, because you have so many rights. And I find that a lot of parents don't understand all of their rights. And it tells you what to do during the identification of the disability, during the evaluation, during dismissal. Placement is another really important that's something really important in the procedural safeguards, is information about if you have an IEP meeting and they want to change your child's placement, what can you do? We're going to go over that a lot more in our third training about what you can do if you don't agree, but it's really important to take a look at these. Prior written notice. They always have to give you in writing any action that they propose to do or refuse to do. And what assessments and what data did they use to make that decision? They can't just change something without letting you know and without having data or assessments to back up their decision. And they also have to describe other choices that they considered before making these choices. And this notice does have to be, of course, in your native language. So you're going to develop, you should be part of developing your child's goals and objectives. Not that you have to know how to write. We're not special education teachers, or most of us aren't. So you shouldn't have to write your own child's IEP goals, but you should know how it works. And you should be able to look at an IEP goal or objective and make sure it links to your child's present levels. So first, they're going to develop the present levels of academic and functional performance. This is what your child can do now, academically and functionally, and what they need help with. And so that should be a very good picture of your child. And if it's not, you need to make sure any changes are made. That's why I think it's really important to have a draft copy of the present levels before your IEP meeting to make sure it's a good picture of your child. And then based on the present levels, they're going to develop measurable annual goals and short-term goals. And of course, you're going to have academic goals and functional goals. And functional goals are going to be things that your child needs in life. Judy, can you help me out there? What an example of a functional goal is like communication and
communication, social skills, adapting
behavior,
to change, things like that, routines, things like that.
Right. So it's really important to understand that everything goes in this order. You know, you don't just decide placement first in the ARD meeting. You have to, it's a process. And a lot of times we see that the present levels don't really mesh with the goals. So they might have a goal or objective for something that the child already knows how to do, or they might not have a goal or objective for something that the child really is important and the child needs to know. So this is just a good visual that it's built from the bottom up. You're going to have your evaluation and ongoing data collection, your present levels, your goals and objectives, supplementary aids and services. So those are like the other services you're going to get, like maybe speech therapy, OT, PT, assistive technology. And you go through all of that before you decide on the placement. So special education is a service. It's not a place. So special education can be provided in many different placements. And we already talked about a read not being a new evaluation. I just wanted to stress that again. So this is not going to be for everybody right now, but it's really important. So when your child is around 14, you're going to have a transition plan in the IEP, and that's you're going to begin thinking about them transitioning out of high school and into the real world. And so you're going to have post-secondary goals. So goals, you're going to have goals for after they leave high school. And for instance, if your child wants to go to college, what does the school need to do to get them ready for that? You know, you want to make sure they're taking all the right courses. And if your child's going to go to work, you're going to make sure that they have all the skills they need to go to work. So transition is, there's three things for transition. There's training and education that go together. And then there's employment and independent living skills. And I know some of you think, oh, well, I can't see my child going to college, but there are a lot of college programs for students with intellectual disabilities or students with disabilities. Some of you might think you don't see your child working, but I know and can give you examples of people with very significant disabilities who do work. It just may not be on the same level. It may not be 40 hours a week, and it may not be what you have in your mind for employment. Same with independent living skills, but we want to make sure they have all of these skills that is as much as possible for them. You know, it's going to look different for my son than it is for Judy. So like my son goes to a day hab program, But after high school, I wanted him to get in a really good day hab program. And so what did we need to look at for independent living and training for him? I needed to make sure he had appropriate behavior, because these day habs don't have to take your child if they don't have appropriate behavior. I wanted to make sure he had a way to communicate, and that he could follow directions, because I didn't want him to go to a day hab where he was just going to be babysat. Where Judy's son, maybe you can talk a little bit about Ryan, because his situation was different than Cameron's, and give them an idea of what transition looked like for Ryan.
Yeah, so he went to high school, and he actually completed a 5th year of high school, because we found that there were still a few classes that would help him, and that could even promote independence. So he then spent a 5th year in high school. Then he went to a 1-year transition, like a post-high school program. And then after that, he went to employment.
Right. And my son also stayed till he was 22, because he had a very good transition program at his high school. And so he needed extra time to work on some of the things so he could get into a really good day hab where they do a lot of vocational training and they're out in the community. They do a lot of volunteer work. So just want you to know that your child doesn't have to leave at 18. They can graduate and walk. They can walk. Let me take that back. They can walk with their graduation class if you want them to, and come back for more transition services. So there's a lot of different IEP considerations. All students should be looked at and see if they need assistive technology. Do they need extended school year services and graduation? Some students, they may need to be considered for auditory, autism, behavior, communication, or limited English, vision. Just trying to cover all the areas. Let me talk a little bit about the Autism Supplement. If your student is on the autism spectrum, or even if they're not, a lot of these things, it could give you ideas for your students. But if your student is on the autism spectrum, there are 11 extra protections that the ARD committee must consider. And this is going to be part of the IEP, and it's very important. And it should be very specific to your child. And they have to write something down under each one of these, or say considered or not considered. But if they need it, they have to put in there specifically for your child, what is that going to look like? So it's extended educational program, that could be extended day, or extended services like during breaks or the summer. Like if your child loses skills after a long break, or is learning a new skill, and if there was a break, they might, it might affect them in a bad way if they didn't extend the school year for them. Daily schedules, that can be very important for students on the autism spectrum, that they have a schedule without unstructured time, without a lot of unstructured time and active engagement. In-home or community-based training, positive behavior supports, futures planning. So planning for the future is really important. You might not be looking at that at a real young age. Parent and family training and support. A lot of the districts provide trainings throughout the year, or they might refer you to trainings like this one from nonprofits, but they have to provide that for you. They have to consider staff to student ratio. based on level of learning. For instance, my son, when he was learning a new skill, it needed to be one-on-one. And then when he was maintaining, he needed to have a ratio of 1 to 3 for that. So it's very specific to your child. What communication interventions do they need? Do they need a visual schedule? Do they need to use the picture exchange system to communicate? Do they need a voice output device to communicate? Also, social skills is another important area for students on the autism spectrum. Are they going to need some social skills training? Professional educator and staff support. What kind of training, if your child has in-class support with a paraprofessional, what kind of training has that paraprofessional had? Does the teacher, maybe you have a regular education teacher that's going to have your student and they need specific training to your child's disability. This should be all in the Autism Supplement. And teaching strategies based on peer-reviewed research. This really applies to everybody. If your child's not making progress, what peer-reviewed research-based interventions are they using with your child? They have to use something that they take data on and it's proven that it works and it works for your child to make appropriate progress. This could be in any areas, not just autism. If your child's really struggling in reading, are they using a peer-reviewed research-based reading intervention? Are they using that intervention with integrity? Are they using it for the right amount of time per day and keeping data on that to make sure that it's working?
Leslie, I just want to remind everyone that we realize it's 1:02, and it's so hard. The first class, we always run over because it takes so long to get everybody in. So we do have a few more slides. If you need to log off, please do. There are some questions in the chat that we will be getting to when Leslie finishes her slides.
Okay, just to talk a little bit about behavior, because that could affect any of our students. If your child's behavior is interfering with them learning, you can ask for a functional behavior assessment. Some of you may say, oh, I already have one of those. And that's great if it's working. If the teacher's just done an informal one and developed a behavior intervention for your plan for your child and it's working, that's great. But please know that if that's not working and if your child's behavior is still interfering, you can ask for a formal functional behavioral assessment to be done by a qualified LSSP, licensed school psychologist, or a BCBA, or somebody that knows a lot about behavior. And then they will come in and observe the child, what behaviors are happening, what's happening before, during, and after. Is somebody inadvertently rewarding the bad behaviors without knowing it? And then they'll have a report, they'll develop a behavior intervention plan that everybody agrees on, what to do before to hopefully make sure the behaviors don't occur, what to do during the behavior if it does happen, and what to do after. And the person that does this, that's highly trained in this area of behavior, would make sure and train all the staff that are working with your child. And it is really important, if what they're already doing is not working, that the person has appropriate training to do the functional behavioral assessment and the behavior intervention plan. STAR test. STAR tests start in 3rd grade. There are different types of STAR tests. Probably won't get into a lot of that today. There's just regular STAR with accommodations that any student can have. There's online STAR that has built-in accommodations, and then there's STAR Alternative that is for students with the most significant disabilities. And if anybody needs any information on that, please contact Judy or myself and let us know. Least restrictive environment. So the law is pretty clear about that all students who require special education have to be educated in the least restrictive environment with their same age peers. That can look different for every child, but you want to make sure that to the maximum extent appropriate that children with disabilities are disabled or educated with their non-disabled peers, and that special classes, separate schools, or removal of the child from regular education occurs only if their disability is so severe that with all the supplementary aids and services provided in the regular classroom don't work. So you don't just want to put a child in a highly segregated class without trying to support them first in the general education class with all the supports and services available. And that might look like in-class support with a paraprofessional. It could be co-teach. Maybe they just need speech therapy in order to participate in the regular ed class. And it can be a combination. It doesn't always have to be all or nothing. And that also applies to the preschool options, the 3 to 5 age. And I just can't say enough that special education is a service. It's not a place. Special education and related services can be provided in a variety of settings. When your child is in the 3 to 5 range, there's something called dual enrollment, and that can look very different for every child. The child may be in a pre-K class. They may be part-time pre-K, part-time early childhood PPCD. They may be in their neighborhood or church preschool and only get speech therapy through the school. So it could look like a lot of different things, a lot of different options there. Head Start is another option too. Students with disabilities can be in Head Start, and Head Start programs are required to have 10% of the student population children with disabilities. So, and I talked a little bit about pre-K. A friend of mine's daughter, she didn't go to the PPCD early childhood program. Instead, she was in pre-kindergarten and had a paraprofessional support her in the pre-kindergarten environment. So a segregated placement on a specific campus in your district, it may or may not be on your home campus. So not all campuses might not have like life skills or adaptive behavior placements. So it was really important for me, for my son to go to his home school, because I wanted him to be at the school he would be at with the neighborhood kids. And I wanted him to be supported at that campus. I wanted him to ride the regular education bus, if possible, with his brother or with a friend from the neighborhood. I know for some students that might not be possible, but I just want you to know what all your options are. I think it's really important for us to have high expectations for our children. And that's another reason I think children should be included as much in the regular education class as possible, because in the regular education class, there are going to be higher expectations. They're going to be exposed to all of the curriculum, where in a highly segregated class, you know, the behavior expectations are maybe not going to be there. They're not going to have appropriate role models for speech and behavior and social skills. And you have a big part in this whole decision-making process. So it's really important to familiarize yourself with the regular education, pre-kindergarten, or whatever grades your child is in, with the curriculum. When a child is included, they don't have to be responsible for everything. You know, they can have accommodations and modifications in the regular education class. All preschoolers definitely do benefit from a language-rich classroom, and I would say all students do. You want them to be in a class that promotes speech and early learning. You wouldn't want your children in a class where none of the students can communicate, because then you only have the teacher communicating. Some of this is specifically for the early childhood age, but it's good information to have. Also wanted to mention that transportation is a related service that should be discussed in every IEP meeting. If your student needs special education transportation, the district is obligated to provide that in most cases. So this is just some of the instructional arrangements, from being fully included or mainstreamed, or maybe you're in resource part of the day, or maybe you're in a self-contained or class like life skills or adaptive behavior class. So it just shows the continuum of placement, and that could go all the way to a non-public or state school, or maybe somebody that's homebound because of medical issues, or even in a hospital, special education has to be provided. So I can hardly see these little arrows at the bottom, and I don't know why my inner button's not working today. This is really important. Remember, at the end of every IEP meeting, you have to sign your name and either agree or disagree. And of course, parents should always work together with the IEP committee to come to an agreement. But if you don't understand something, or you don't agree with something in that document that you should take a look at before you sign agree or disagree, you shouldn't be checking agree if you don't understand something or you don't agree. And it doesn't have to be contentious. You know, maybe you need to take it home and look at it first, or share it with your spouse, or have a friend who knows more about the IEP process look at it. But it is a legal document, so you don't want to sign it if you don't agree with it, because you do have a lot of options if you don't agree. If you don't agree, we're going to talk about what to do if you don't agree, but there are a lot of options. And don't let the ARD committee make you feel bad for disagreeing. Now, I'm not saying you should disagree about every little thing, but if it's something really important, don't be afraid to disagree, because you will have a 10-day recess ARD to try to come back. And sometimes all it takes is disagreeing to get things worked out, because then everybody kind of gets together and looks at other options. This is the handbook that I've been talking about, the IDEA handbook. It was created by the ARC of Texas and Disability Rights Texas, who are two awesome nonprofit organizations. So, and it does come in Spanish also. The Spanish one has not been updated, but the 2018 version is still really good. I encourage you to print this out, read it, learn it, use it, take it to every meeting that you go to. And, you know, like I said, I had pages tabbed on mine, highlighted, and I think it will be so helpful to you for all the years of your child's education. Okay, Judy.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So please, please take the survey. We know we're over, and we know we did, and we apologize for that. We really appreciate that so many of you still stayed on. We do have some questions, and Leslie, if you, I put the survey link in the chat box for people just to click on if you want to go to the last slide. I think there's one more slide that says thank you and questions. So yes, we have lots of questions. We answered the one about, is it 30 calendar days or school days? And it is school days. One question, what's the time window to refute the IEP? So if you don't agree with the IEP, don't sign it.
No, you have to sign it.
Oh, I'm
but you have
sorry,
to
you
check
disagree
agree
with
or
it.
disagree.
Yeah, so what, in answer to your question there is, you would disagree. So as far as the time window goes, you're disagreeing right then. Now, maybe you just need to take home and read it, as Leslie mentioned. Maybe there's just something you don't understand. But then everyone will reconvene in 10 school days.
Or it might be more than 10 days if you all agree, more like if you had to ask for a new, for an independent evaluation, you might not come back until after that's done. But, you know, usually you come back in 10 days, or could be more if y'all all agree to come back in 15 days. It might not work exactly on 10 days.
To the person on this call who is Liza, if you could please private message me the name that you registered with. I have not been able to find you on my list. Thank you so much, Liza. We have another question. Is there a repercussion to declining services 1 year and then asking back for services the following year? There should never be repercussions. As Leslie mentioned, you are the advocate for your child, for your loved one, and you're just trying to do what's best. Sure, we all need to be reasonable and we want to work together, but no, there should not be repercussions at all. Our kids have gone through so much, especially these last few years with COVID. You know, progress is not always upward. Sometimes it's up, down, and that's okay. You may not need services 1 year, but then you need them the following year, and that's okay.
But just know that if you do decline special education services, your child will be treated just like any other typical student. There will not be anything extra that a typical student wouldn't be provided, that would be provided.
Great question. How soon, the day before an initial evaluation, do you ask what tests would be performed? My son's first evaluation is this Thursday.
I would ask for that when they give you the sheet where you have to sign consent for evaluations. At that time, I would ask, what evaluations are you going to be doing? And ask any questions then. That way you have time to go to that Texas Autism Target and look up the evaluations, make sure it's appropriate, an appropriate evaluation. They shouldn't have any problem telling you now. You could go ahead and ask for that, but you want to make sure they're evaluating in every area that you want to be evaluated in, want him or her to be evaluated in.
So I know that there was a parent who did not have a good experience and they didn't like the way they were being spoken to. They spoke to themselves mostly. And yes, sometimes ARD meetings can go very fast. And I think it's really important for any parent that this happens to, you know, you can't change what happened, but at your next ARD meeting, if you don't understand something or people are having side conversations that are making you feel really, really uncomfortable, you need to say, hold on, everybody. I'm getting confused. This is a lot for me. Please repeat that. Or can we discuss this more? Or say to Mr. and Mrs. whoever it was that was talking amongst themselves, could you please share that conversation with me? And it's really important that you feel comfortable, because parents, if you don't feel comfortable in an ARD meeting, how are you really going to be able to advocate for your child? That would
That's
be
why
very
you should bring somebody with you too.
exactly.
And if you're not feeling good at the end of that meeting, then you need to sign your name and check agree and come back.
Absolutely. Someone had asked, how many people can they bring to the IEP meeting? You can bring as many people as you want. If you want to bring your son's BCBA and an IEP advocate, absolutely. And you don't need to request to anybody that they be present. They can just show up with you. Please do not worry that you need the school's permission to have someone else other than you present at the meeting.
It
Feel
is
free.
nice to share that with them, but they cannot cancel the meeting or anything because you're bringing somebody. And it would be courteous, because if they were bringing in the director of special ed to your meeting, you'd kind of want to know that ahead of time. So it kind of works both ways. But like Judy said, you don't have to.
Exactly. Sometimes you don't know until the last minute if somebody
Yeah.
can come. It really makes me sad that you didn't know your rights and the school did not provide the procedural safeguards handbook. If you could email me or Leslie after this meeting and let us know, because we need to find out more about that. They're supposed to provide the procedural safeguards to you once a year. So not at every meeting, but once a year that is supposed to be provided to you.
And
So
definitely at your first meeting.
absolutely. So Bhaskar, please, you had written that openly, so please let me know and let's talk about that. This they have to give to us. Somebody had written to me privately, but I don't understand the question. They have to give to us after or before the ARD meeting. I apologize. If you're referring to the procedural safeguards, that should be given to you at the beginning of the meeting. How often are they required to do the PLAF?
That should be done once a year. So as your annual R date approaches, they're gonna start talking amongst themselves. They're gonna do the PLAF. They're gonna see what goals have been mastered, what goals need to be continued or changed, and develop new goals and objectives. So that should all happen leading up to. So when you get a note, you're going to get a notice at least 5 days before your ARD meeting, but kind of know when your child's annual ARD is. So if, for instance, like if it's March 25th, at the beginning of the March, you know, you might want to email the diagnostician and the teacher or your case manager and say, I know my child's ARD meeting is coming up. I just want to remind you that I require a copy of the draft PLAFT, IEP goals and objectives, and any new information that's going to be discussed at the meeting. So you have a chance to look over that too.
So before I get to my next question, to the person who is Liza, please send me the name that you registered with so I can check you off. Great question. Dual enrollment, is that like Pegasus, half general ed and half special ed?
I don't know what Pegasus is, but it could be like my child went to a church preschool for when he was between ages, he could have gone to one between ages 3 and 5. So maybe he went to the church preschool for half a day, and he could go to the early childhood preschool program for the other half a day. My son actually did ABA therapy. So he did ABA half the day and went to the preschool program for the other half of the day. Some kids I know go to their church preschool and then just get speech services through the school district. So just a variety.
Yeah, what we mean, with dual enrollment, like my son went to a private preschool in the morning and then to the early childhood special education program in the afternoon. but that's what we mean. Not within the school going to two different programs where part is gen ed and part is special ed. That's not dual enrollment there.
No,
It's
but
when
that
you're
could
going-
happen.
My daughter is in the program that is only with special children, but I would like her to start beginning in regular classes with help. She has autism, hearing problems, and learning disabilities. My question is, can she? Absolutely, she can. If the answer is yes, do I have to wait until next year or can it be done now?
So you can call an ARD meeting
Right.
at any time. You know, you don't want to have a bunch of ARD meetings because they're a lot. And, but if your child is making a lot of progress or it needs to be, or you need a different placement, or maybe they're not making any progress, you can call an IEP meeting. So I would request in writing, and there is a sample letter, I believe, in the IDEA handbook to request an ARD meeting. You could start there. So, you know, it's what is it going to take? You know, what's it going to take to have your child included for all or part of the day? And what would that look like? And I will say, inclusion in regular ed done wrong is worse than your child being in a segregated setting. So you want to make sure that it's done right and that they have the appropriate supports. And if your child is, one thing we didn't bring up, if your child's in a segregated environment, in a self-contained class, you have a right to ask for cameras to be placed in that classroom. It should be on your district special education website, and they have to do it. And I would recommend you do that. And if your child is in a self-contained classroom, I highly recommend that you ask to go and observe, because, you know, there are really good self-contained classrooms and there's really bad. You know, I just wanted to make sure that my child wasn't just being babysat, you know.
Really, really important.
Yeah.
Which leads us to our next question.
Okay.
What's the criteria for self-contained class? So it's a joint discussion. Like, for example, with my son, he needed low sensory, and in a regular education classroom, he could handle it for maybe 1 or 2 classes, but then he needed to go back to that self-contained class. So it's not so much the criteria as what works best for your child.
But regular education should always be considered first.
Absolutely.
It shouldn't be, I'm going to put your child in this self-contained class and they have to meet some magical thing to be included. I mean,
yeah, there is no criteria for that.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. It's yes, there may need to be some modifications or accommodations, but it's not like they have to score something in order to be admitted.
Right. And just remember, there's no special education after your child. There's no special place unless you're planning on your child going to live in an institution. So you want to hopefully prepare them as much as possible for real life, but not to their detriment. I mean, I'm not saying my child was definitely pulled out to a self-contained class to work one-on-one on stuff he couldn't, like Judy's son couldn't obtain in the regular ed class. It doesn't have to be all or anything, but just keep in mind, you know, I was always looking to the future, planning for the future. What is his life going to look like when he gets out of high school? And so if your child is only in a segregated environment all through school, and then all of a sudden you expect them to be part of the community in real life, well, that's going to be a big shock to their system.
Very overwhelming. Can we get a physical copy of the IDEA manual? I only have it online.
Disability Rights Texas or the ARC of Texas may have some if you don't have a way to print them out. I'll try to look into that and
Yeah,
see if
and
there
email
are
me
any.
on that, and I'll see if we can try to get that. What if the committee doesn't agree to our points? Who is the watchdog? Following process steps can just delay things. Well, you have to follow the process. Leslie already mentioned that, and in our third session, we're going to be focusing specifically on what to do if you disagree. We had to cover the basics first, and then we're going to cover the top 10 tips for successful ARDs. But that third session on Thursday will be what to do if you disagree. It's not something we can just answer in a minute, unfortunately. Got some thank yous. Thank you so much. Is there a deadline to add or change accommodations on the ARD IEP?
Not really. I mean, you can even change some things without having an IEP meeting. So if your child needs additional accommodations, I would talk to your case manager. Everybody should have a case manager. And
Yes.
that case manager may be the special education teacher. It could be the diagnostician. It could be the speech pathologist if your child has speech therapy. So find out who your child's case manager is and discuss with them the accommodations you need to add, you feel like need to be added, and see if they can do that without an ARD meeting. If you're not changing anything major, that should be something simple to do. But make sure it's in writing. If it's not in writing, it's highly likely it's not going to happen.
Yeah,
And make them
sure.
respond. So, and if you have
Very
a
hard.
conversation on the phone, when you hang up and somebody says, oh, don't worry, Miss Liza, we're going to do this, this, and this. Then as soon as you get off the phone, you're going to email them back and say, as per our conversation today, I understood this, this, and this. Please email me back and confirm that I understood you correctly. Because that's
Really
going
important to do.
yeah, that's going to keep everybody on the same page.
Bhaskar, I know that Leslie has been working with your family, so we're going to take that after the meeting. And that's something you can follow up with Leslie. I'm very sorry to hear that it is not going well, because that I find that disturbing on many levels. Laura, does this apply to charter schools like Iep? Absolutely. Charter schools are not exempt from anything we have discussed. If they say we don't have the resources, we don't have the funding, I feel badly for the school, but parents, that is not your problem. Charter schools are held to IDEA standards, just like every other school in the district. Yeah, I know you're stressing out of pain, Dad. I feel for you. We can talk about that. Because the first day of school, I tried to give them a written notice and didn't hear from them until 3 weeks later. Laura, maybe we can talk about that. I know it's already 1:30. Why don't you email? Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead and email us, but I want to
Yeah.
give you a tip. When I send an email, like if I send an email or give them written notice of something and I don't hear back in a timely manner, then I'm going to get on my email and I'm going to copy the person that I sent it to or forward it and say, below is the email that I sent on such and such date, and I haven't heard back. Can you please respond? And if they don't respond, then I'm going to send it again. And I'm also going to copy the principal of the school. And if they still don't respond, then the next time I'm going to copy the principal of the school and the special education director. Of course, I'm always going to be polite and nice, but I'm going to hold them accountable, you know, and just like if I wasn't doing my job and you had a problem with me, you could always go over my head to our executive director. It works the same way in the school district. And sometimes just CCing, copying somebody above their head gets them to respond.
Yeah, and Leslie, I think you may have used the term case manager a little too loosely because schools don't have case managers.
We had a case, everybody has a case manager for special education. They may not call it that in
Oh,
every.
right. Well, but the special
School.
education chairperson is what we usually called it in our
Yeah,
district.
but some people had different ones. Like our speech therapist was our case manager, was our
Okay.
designated case manager. And some people have the special ed chair. Some people have their actual teacher as their case manager. But I'm not talking about a case manager like that takes care of everything. I'm talking about
Right.
just your special education case manager.
Yeah, no, I got you. Somebody asked, oh, thank you, Liza. Now I know who you are. Okay. Gosh, so many comments, and I know it's 1:35. To the parent who wrote, trying to send my child out of the school district for behavior, please email me or Leslie. We really need to, it's leslie@familytofamilynetwork.org or judy@familytofamilynetwork.org, because that just requires a really long discussion.
Yeah.
Will the handbook link or manual be sent out? You'll see it in the slides when I send them to you. I feel like my son is going to a daycare. That's very frustrating. We never want to hear that. I had this issue with cameras. No one told us about it until I complained about it in his ARD meeting. Yes, Leslie explained how you can do that.
Yeah, and please email me if you're having trouble finding any of this information that we're talking about today. If you will email me either at info@familytofamily or leslie@familytofamilynetwork.org, I will send you very specific information about whatever it is that you're having trouble with.
Yeah, and Leslie, if you could type both of our emails in the chat box, that would be great. As we mentioned, it may not necessarily be a case manager. If my son was in a self-contained class for part of the day, then what we would do is that's the person who would be my go-to person, or the special education chairperson if he had a mixture of special ed and regular education. So to the person who sent me, the child's speech therapist and everybody else assigned, I would probably reach out to the diagnostician, Ms. Pena, and reach out to them first, or the special education coordinator. So I believe I got everything. If I didn't, I know this ran way over. My apologies. We will be sending out the slides. Please, please, please complete the survey. We hope to start more on time on Wednesday. And we really, really appreciate everything that you all did to contribute to the success of this program. Leslie just typed in our email addresses. So we thank you so much for joining us. It was truly our pleasure. We look forward to seeing you on Wednesday at noon.